Is that your idea of a joke? The voice was sharp, laced with contempt, cutting through the lazy hum of the playground. Kyle, with his cocky smirk, stood towering over the smaller kids, his arms crossed as he looked down at the old man leaning against the fence, watching the commotion. Eli Montgomery, 82 years old, hadn't moved an inch since he'd arrived. His jeans were faded, his jacket worn at the sleeves, but his eyes were sharp, still carrying the weight of decades spent in places most people only read about in history books. You think you can teach these kids anything? Kyle continued, his voice dripping with arrogance. They're not dumb. They don't need some old man teaching them how to fight. You haven't seen a real fight in years. Eli took a long breath, the quiet around him thick with judgment. The young man's words hit him like they were nothing, like they didn't matter. But they did. He'd spent his whole life fighting, some of those fights still felt fresh, like they had just happened yesterday. He didn't need to prove himself to anyone, but for some reason, this kid's disrespect stung a little more than it should have. The kids around them started whispering, glancing at one another. You think you can handle it, Grandpa? Kyle challenged. Show us. Go ahead. Teach us how to fight. The challenge hung in the air, and for a moment, everything stood still. Eli stepped forward, his slow gait betraying the years, but his eyes remained locked on Kyle. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He simply walked toward the center of the playground, his shoes making no sound on the gravel. The children scattered, forming a loose circle around him. Kyle's smirk faded slightly as he crossed his arms. Let's see what you've got, old man. Eli raised his hand, signaling for silence. First rule, he said, his voice calm, steady, as though every word carried the weight of experience. You don't fight because you can. You fight because you have to. The group of kids stood frozen, their attention now fully on him. Eli had their focus. You've got to think before you act. You've got to stay calm. He turned to face Kyle, meeting his eyes with a look that made the younger man shift uncomfortably. I don't need to show you how to throw a punch. What I'm gonna show you is how to know when you need to throw one. Kyle stepped forward, still skeptical. And how do you know when that is? Hey, he scoffed. Eli smiled slightly, a glint of something deeper in his eyes. You learn by surviving. And I've survived a hell of a lot. With that, he demonstrated a simple move, slipping past Kyle's mock attack, his hand gently but firmly taking hold of Kyle's wrist. The move was fluid, effortless, and before Kyle knew it, he was caught off guard, standing still, unable to move. The kids watched in stunned silence. Eli let go of Kyle's wrist and took a step back. You see? It's not about being stronger. It's about knowing what you're doing, using your mind, and not letting anger control you. You can't let anyone push you into a fight. But when you do fight, make sure you finish it, because if you don't, you're gonna wish you had. Kyle stood there, his face reddening, trying to regain his composure. He had never expected the old man to handle him so easily. He hadn't expected anyone to. But Eli had just done it, without a single word of anger, without raising a fist, and with more precision than Kyle had ever imagined. The other kids, now wide-eyed, looked at one another, the air thick with admiration and surprise. Kyle opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was speechless, caught in the quiet power that Eli had just unleashed. Eli turned his back on them, slowly walking away, but not before he spoke one final time. The world doesn't owe you anything. But I'm still here. And I'm still standing. Don't forget that. Eli took a deep breath as he walked away from the group of kids, his slow, deliberate steps contrasting with the buzzing energy around him. Kyle stood there, still stunned, his pride wounded but his curiosity piqued. Eli didn't need to turn around to know that the kids were whispering, processing what had just happened. They had seen something they had never expected from an old man in faded jeans. Something real. Something that spoke of years and experience they could never imagine. He wasn't sure if they understood yet, but the seed had been planted. That's how it's done, Eli muttered to himself, a half smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He knew the lesson had been taught. And it wasn't about self-defense. It was about something deeper. It was about respect, the kind that only came through living, through surviving, through fighting for something more than yourself. His legs were tired, but his heart felt lighter as he made his way to the park bench. He was ready to rest for a while, to watch the kids from a distance, to see if they had learned anything. As Eli sat down, he noticed one of the kids, Emily, slowly making her way toward him. She was shy, her eyes hesitant, but there was something about the way she held herself that told Eli she had more to say than she let on. She stood in front of him for a moment before finally speaking, her voice soft but clear. "You really know how to fight, don't you?" she asked, not with mockery but with a genuine curiosity. Eli chuckled softly, the sound rough, like gravel being dragged across stone. "I know how to survive," he replied. "That's the trick." Emily stood still, processing his words. For a second, Eli thought she might walk away, like the others. But instead, she sat down next to him, a safe distance away, but close enough that Eli knew she wanted to talk. "I don't get it," she said quietly. "Why do you still care about teaching us? You've probably done everything. Why teach us to fight now?" Eli looked out across the park, watching the kids slowly start to disperse, their energy finally calming. "Because I've seen what happens when you don't know how to fight," he said, his voice low. "It's not about the punches or kicks. It's about standing up for yourself when no one else will. It's about not letting people like Kyle push you around." Emily nodded, understanding more than Eli expected. "But what if I'm not strong enough?" she asked. Eli turned to her, his blue eyes clear, sharp. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "It's not about being the strongest person in the room. It's about being strong enough to stand up for what's right. Strong enough to walk away from a fight when it's not worth it. And strong enough to keep going when everyone else thinks you can't." Emily sat there for a moment, absorbing his words. Eli could see the wheels turning in her head, the shift starting. She wasn't just hearing the lesson. She was beginning to understand it. Eli didn't have much left to teach her. Not yet, anyway. But he had given her something important, the belief that she could stand her ground, no matter what life threw at her. Eli sat back on the bench, looking up at the sky, feeling the weight of the years on his shoulders. It wasn't easy, this teaching thing. It wasn't something he'd planned to do, but somehow it felt right. The world had a way of putting you in places you didn't expect. He had never thought he'd be here, teaching kids self-defense. But it was just like he had told them, life was about surviving, about standing tall even when no one thought you could. And maybe, just maybe, this was one last lesson he needed to teach before his time was up. Eli stood up from the bench, the soft rustling of his jacket the only sound breaking the stillness of the park. Emily had been quiet for a while, her gaze fixed on the ground, as if the weight of his words were sinking in. He could see the change in her, the way her shoulders had shifted, the tension in her body slowly releasing. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make him feel like the lesson had been worth it. The sun was starting to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the playground. It was time to go. He didn't have much longer in this world, but maybe he had just enough time to help a few more kids find their footing. "I'll see you around, Emily," Eli said, his voice gentle but firm. She looked up at him, her face softened with something new, respect, maybe, or understanding. "Thanks, Mr. Montgomery," she said quietly. "I think I get it now. It's not about fighting. It's about knowing when to fight and when to walk away." Eli gave her a nod. "Exactly," he replied. He didn't wait for her to say more. He didn't need to. He could see it in her eyes, she had learned what she needed to. As he walked away, he felt the years catching up with him again. His back ached, his knees creaked, but he still felt the same fire inside, the one that had carried him through countless battles, the one that made him stand tall when the world told him to stay down. Eli walked slowly, his steps measured, as if he were savoring the last moments of his day. He had done what he came to do. He had shown them what it meant to stand firm, to face the world with dignity. The park was quiet now, the sounds of children playing fading into the evening air. It felt like the world was settling down around him, as if it knew that this was the end of something important. He reached the edge of the park, his gaze lifting to the horizon. For a moment, he thought about the old days, the days when he had been part of something bigger, when his life had meant more than just surviving. But those days were gone now, and he wasn't sure if he missed them. There was something peaceful about this moment, something that made him feel like he had done his part. He had taught, and now it was time to step back and let others carry on. As he reached the street corner, Eli paused, glancing over his shoulder one last time. The playground was empty now, but he knew it wasn't truly empty. It was filled with the echoes of lessons learned, of kids who had found something they didn't know they needed. And maybe that was enough. With a final deep breath, Eli turned and walked home, the weight of the years settling on his shoulders, but his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. Eli's apartment was small, tucked away on the second floor of an old building just off the main street. The faded curtains fluttered slightly as a breeze drifted through the cracked window, but inside, the air was still. Eli sat in his worn armchair, his eyes scanning the stack of old photographs on the coffee table. There was a time when those pictures had been full of life, full of people who mattered, people who had shared those same struggles, those same lessons. But now, they were just memories. He leaned back in the chair, closing his eyes for a moment, letting the weight of the years catch up with him. He had lived a life. A hard one. And now, there was nothing left but the quiet of his apartment, the sound of his own breath, and the occasional knock on the door from a neighbor or an old friend who didn't know what to say. His fingers brushed over one photograph in particular, a picture of him and a young man, both smiling in front of a helicopter. It was taken long ago, back when he was still active, when he had purpose beyond just surviving. The boy in the picture had looked up to him, had admired him. Eli could still hear the kid's voice in his mind, calling him Sarge, asking for advice on everything from the best way to stay warm in the field to how to handle the weight of a gun. Eli had been the one to teach him, to show him the ropes. But now, that boy was gone. Another casualty of war. The thought didn't sit well with him. Eli had seen so many die, so many fall, and yet somehow, he had kept going. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep doing it, though. The aches in his joints were getting worse, and the pain in his chest, which he'd written off as nothing more than old age, had started to feel a little too real. But there was one thing he knew for sure: he wasn't ready to give up yet. Not now. Not when there were still kids like Emily who needed someone to teach them the right way to live. He had walked away from the park that day with a sense of purpose, something he hadn't felt in years. He had given them more than just self-defense techniques. He had given them something that was worth more: respect. The kind of respect that wasn't earned through violence or power, but through understanding. Through living. And that lesson had stuck with them. He could feel it in his bones, in the way Emily had looked at him, in the way the others had watched quietly, absorbing every word. They would remember it, and maybe, just maybe, they would carry it with them when they faced the world. A soft knock at the door broke his thoughts. Eli slowly stood up, his knees creaking as he made his way to the door. He wasn't surprised to see Emily standing there, her eyes wide, like she had something important to say. "Mr. Montgomery," she said, her voice slightly unsure but determined. I wanted to. Thank you. For what you said. It made me think, a lot. I've been dealing with some stuff, and I think I finally understand what you meant about standing up for yourself. Eli gave her a gentle smile, stepping aside to let her in. You're welcome, Emily. Sometimes, it takes a while for things to click. But when they do, they stick. She nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude. I'll never forget what you taught me, she said. I just wanted to let you know that. Eli's heart swelled a little. It wasn't much, but it was everything. She had learned. She had understood. And that was all he could ask for. As she walked out the door, Eli sat back down in his chair, the weight of the years not quite as heavy as it had been before. Maybe he was getting old, maybe his body was failing him, but in that moment, he realized that his work wasn't done. Not yet. Illy woke up to the soft light of early morning streaming through his window. The world outside was still, the sounds of the city just starting to stir as the sun peeked over the horizon. He sat up slowly, feeling the familiar stiffness in his bones, but it wasn't enough to stop him from getting up. He had spent too many years waiting for the world to come to him. It was time to take a step forward again. The streets were quiet when he left his apartment, the cool air of the morning filling his lungs as he made his way down the sidewalk. His feet moved on their own, carrying him toward the park where everything had changed just a few days ago. His hands were buried deep in his jacket pockets, the old fabric worn thin from years of use. But there was a certain comfort in it. He had been through worse. He had fought in wars, faced death, and lost friends, but he kept going. That's what life was about, wasn't it? Moving forward, no matter what. As he walked, he thought about Emily and the others. He hadn't expected her to come by after their lesson, but she had. And it meant more than he cared to admit. It wasn't just about teaching them how to defend themselves. It was about teaching them how to live, how to stand tall when everything around them told them to shrink. He reached the park and sat down on the same bench where he had talked with Emily. The area was still, with only a few joggers passing by, their footsteps light on the pavement. It was early, and most people were still inside, wrapped in the comfort of their homes. But not Eli. He had nothing to rush back to, no place to go but here. The quiet was peaceful. He closed his eyes, listening to the sounds of the morning. The birds, the rustling of leaves in the trees, the distant hum of the city coming to life. It was all so familiar, and yet, it felt different. There was a sense of calm that he hadn't felt in a long time. It was as though the world had slowed down just for him. He didn't know how much longer he had, but he had made peace with it. For the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. After a while, he stood up, stretched his aching muscles, and made his way back home. The walk was slow, but it gave him time to think. His life had been full of twists and turns, some good, some bad, but through it all, he had kept moving. And now, maybe that was enough. Maybe he didn't need to be out there fighting anymore. Maybe he could leave that to the younger generation. He had already done his part. As he walked through the door of his apartment, he felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. But it wasn't the kind of tiredness that came from physical labor. It was the kind of tiredness that came from years of living. And for the first time in a long while, he welcomed it. He wasn't done yet. There was still more to do. But for now, he would rest. Eli sat down at his table, pulling out the photos again. He traced his finger over the edges, remembering the past but not letting it weigh him down. He had done what he came to do. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Illy woke up the next morning with the same quiet resolve that had carried him through the years. The sun was already high in the sky, casting a warm glow through the blinds of his apartment. His muscles ached, but it was a familiar pain, one he had learned to live with. He moved slowly, stretching his back, feeling the weight of time in every movement. He wasn't sure what today would bring, but it didn't matter. He had made peace with the fact that his days were numbered, but he wasn't going to waste them. There was something still left to do. After a quick breakfast, he found himself walking toward the park again. It wasn't part of a plan, just a simple routine he had fallen into over the past few days. The same path, the same park bench. The world had a way of making you realize what mattered, and right now, Eli felt that quiet contentment in knowing that he was teaching something valuable. When he reached the park, the sun was still warm, and there was a calmness in the air that made the world feel like it had stopped for just a moment. He sat down on the bench, letting his tired body relax for a few minutes. As he sat there, he began to notice something he hadn't before: the kids. They were scattered around, playing and laughing, just as they had the day before, but today, something was different. The way they interacted with each other, the way they carried themselves, it was as if they were a little more aware, a little more confident. Emily was sitting on the grass with a few of the others, talking quietly. She looked up and saw him sitting there. For a moment, their eyes met, and Eli could see the change in her. She was no longer the unsure girl from just a few days ago. She had found her strength. Slowly, she stood up and walked over to him, her steps confident, her face serious, yet there was a hint of something softer behind her gaze. "Mr. Montgomery," she said, her voice steady. "I've been thinking about what you said. About standing up for yourself, about not letting others push you around." Eli smiled at her, nodding slowly. "And?" he asked, his voice gentle. "I get it now," Emily replied, her eyes steady. "It's not just about defending yourself. It's about knowing your worth, and not letting anyone take that away from you." Eli felt a warmth spread through him. It was the kind of warmth that didn't come from the sun, but from seeing someone take a lesson and make it their own. It wasn't just about fighting. It was about learning to live with respect for yourself and others. "That's right," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's about knowing when to stand your ground, and when to walk away. When to fight for what's right and when to let go. You've got to pick your battles, Emily. But you also have to know that you're worth fighting for." Emily nodded, her expression softening. She sat down beside him, her legs crossed as she looked out at the other kids. "I'm going to start teaching them," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "What you taught me. They need to know. They need to understand that they're stronger than they think." Eli's heart swelled with pride. It wasn't just about him teaching them. It was about passing on that knowledge, that strength, to the next generation. Emily was already becoming the leader he had hoped she would. The others were starting to notice, too. They were watching her, seeing the confidence in her posture, the way she carried herself with a sense of purpose. It was as if the lessons had begun to spread, like a ripple in the water. Eli didn't need to say anything else. He knew that the change was happening, that something important was taking root. The world was still turning, and the next generation was starting to find its footing. And for the first time in a long time, Eli felt like he had made a real difference. He stood up slowly, his bones protesting, but the pride in his chest kept him steady. "Keep going, Emily," he said softly. "You're doing good." She smiled at him, her eyes bright with determination. "I will," she said. And for the first time in years, Eli felt a sense of peace. He had done what he could, and the rest was up to them. Eli stood at the window, watching as the morning light slowly filled the streets. The sound of cars and distant chatter reached his ears, but the world outside seemed far away, as if it belonged to someone else. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of time pressing on him. The aches in his joints, the stiffness in his muscles, they were all familiar companions now. But it didn't matter. He had done what he could, and now it was up to them. The kids, the ones he had taught. They were the future. And for the first time in years, Eli felt a sense of peace about that. Emily had come a long way since the first time he met her. She wasn't the same unsure girl she had been. She was standing tall now, a quiet leader among the others, teaching them the same lessons he had passed on to her. It was strange, how quickly things could change. How quickly someone could grow, without even realizing it. Eli couldn't help but feel a small pride swelling inside him whenever he saw her or the others out in the park, practicing what they had learned. He had helped them find their strength, their sense of purpose. But now, he had to let go. It wasn't easy. Letting go never was. He had spent so many years fighting, surviving, and now he had to trust that the next generation would carry on. He had taught them all he could, and the rest was up to them. With a soft sigh, Eli turned away from the window and made his way toward the door. The day was waiting for him. Maybe there was still something left for him to do, some small piece of unfinished business. As he stepped out onto the street, he felt the cool breeze against his face, the world around him buzzing with the energy of life. It was a strange feeling, the calmness inside him, as if the chaos of the past had finally settled into something more manageable. Maybe it was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that his work wasn't in vain. that, at the very least, he had made a difference. He wandered down the street slowly, his steps unhurried, taking in the sights and sounds of the city. He wasn't sure where he was going, but it didn't matter. The journey was enough. The park was ahead, the familiar sight of the bench where he had spent so many hours. He sat down and looked out across the open space, the laughter of the kids in the distance. It felt good, watching them, knowing they were learning, knowing they were growing. It was everything Eli had hoped for. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he had finally found a place where he belonged. The world was moving forward, and so was he. It didn't matter how slow the steps were, how tired his body felt. He was still here. And that was enough. Eli woke up to the sound of rain tapping against his window. The world outside was washed in a dull grey, the clouds heavy with the promise of more. It was one of those days where everything seemed still, as if the world was holding its breath. He sat up in bed, stretching his stiff limbs, feeling the weight of age settle into his bones. For a moment, he considered staying in, letting the rain wash away the thoughts that had been lingering in his mind. But he knew better. He couldn't just sit and wait. Not now. Not when there was still work to be done. Slowly, he dressed, the motions automatic, like he had done them 1,000 times before. He stepped outside into the cool air, the rain falling softly around him, and walked toward the park. There was something calming about the way the rain blurred the world, softened the edges of everything. The familiar path to the bench felt different today, somehow quieter, as if the city itself was taking a moment to reflect. As he reached the park, he saw the kids again. They were huddled together under a shelter, laughing and joking, their faces bright despite the weather. Emily was among them, her posture straight, her head held high as she spoke to the others. Eli watched for a moment, seeing how much she had changed. She wasn't the same girl who had walked up to him days ago, uncertain and unsure. She had become someone else, someone who knew who she was, someone who knew her worth. It made something stir inside him. It made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he had done something right. As he approached, Emily saw him and smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. She waved for the others to gather, and they all moved toward him. "Mr. Montgomery," she said, her voice steady, "we've been practicing what you taught us." The others, "They're getting it." "I'm getting it." Eli nodded slowly, his heart swelling with quiet pride. "You've got it, Emily," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You just had to. Believe in it. Believe in yourself." The other kids nodded in agreement, their eyes bright with a new kind of understanding. Eli could see it in their faces, the shift in them. They were no longer just kids running around. They were becoming something more, something stronger. He didn't need to say much more. He had given them what they needed. The rest, they would figure out on their own. Eli took a step back, watching as they began to practice once more, their movements more confident, their voices louder. They were starting to lead each other, starting to become the people they were meant to be. He didn't need to be there to guide them anymore. They had found their path. As he turned to leave, Eli felt the weight on his shoulders lighten. He had done his part. And now, it was up to them. The rain continued to fall, but Eli didn't mind. It felt like the world was cleansing itself, washing away the old to make room for the new. As he walked home, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. It wasn't the end of his journey, but it was the end of one chapter. And for the first time in a long time, Eli knew that the next chapter was in good hands. Eli woke up to the sound of his phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was early, still dark outside, the kind of early that made the world feel like it was still asleep. He reached over, rubbing his eyes, and picked up the phone. It was a text from Emily. "Mr. Montgomery, I just wanted to let you know we're ready for the next lesson. The others are learning. I'm teaching them just like you taught me." Eli smiled to himself, feeling a warmth spread through him. He didn't need much anymore. A simple text, a small confirmation that they were carrying on the lessons, was all it took to make him feel like his work was done. He put the phone down and sat up slowly, stretching his aching muscles. The years had caught up with him, but there was still a fire inside him that wouldn't be extinguished. Not yet. He knew he wasn't going to be around forever. His body was showing the wear of decades of hard living, but his mind was sharp. He was ready. He stood up, made himself a cup of coffee, and sat by the window, watching the sky slowly lighten. There was something peaceful about the quiet mornings, something that made him feel grounded, like he was still part of the world, still relevant. After a while, Eli dressed in his usual faded jeans and an old jacket, the same jacket he had worn for years, and stepped outside. The streets were empty, just the way he liked it. The world hadn't fully woken up yet. He made his way to the park, his steps slow but steady. There was something about the familiarity of the path, the same worn bench, the same feeling in the air. It felt like home. When he arrived at the park, he found the kids there, just like he had hoped. They were practicing, laughing, helping each other. Emily stood in the middle, directing them, her confidence evident in the way she moved. Eli watched from a distance, leaning against the tree. They didn't need him to show them how to fight anymore. They had learned to fight on their own, to fight for what they believed in. He didn't need to intervene. This was their moment, not his. After a while, Emily saw him. She stopped what she was doing and walked over, her smile bright as she approached him. "Mr. Montgomery," she said, her voice steady, "we've come a long way, haven't we?" Eli nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "You've all come a long way," he said. "But it's not over yet." She nodded, looking back at the group. "I know. But we're ready. We're ready for whatever comes next." Eli smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. It wasn't just about teaching them how to defend themselves. It was about teaching them how to stand tall, how to lead, how to live with purpose. And they had learned. They were ready. "You've done well, Emily," he said. "And the others, too. You've all done well." She smiled at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. For everything." Eli stood there for a moment, watching them, his heart full. He had done his part. The rest was up to them. With a final nod, he turned and made his way home, the weight of the years on his shoulders but a lightness in his step. He had taught them what they needed to know. And that was enough. He wasn't sure how much time he had left, but he knew this: he had left the world better than he had found it. And that was all anyone could hope for.